All right, here we are to talk about Disenchantment Part 4. Or for the folks who just use the regular terms for things, it's Season 4, Series 4 of the show if you happen to be from the UK. It is pretty clear to me now that Disenchantment just isn't really my thing. I've watched all of it. Of course, I was there from, I think, the release day of Season 1. I was there, watched all of it, but since then, I've kept up with every season. About a year ago, I would assume it was about a year ago, I talked about Part 3, Season 3 of Disenchantment, and that was just one big long ramble. It was actually much longer than the video I posted, but I cut it way down. Some people got upset with specific points I was trying to make in there. I stand by pretty much all of them, but this time around, I'm definitely not coming at this from an angle of, ooh, I'm like upset about the show and I need to yell about it. That's not where I am with it at all. Instead, I just want to walk through a few different specific areas or aspects of Disenchantment specific to Season 4, and that's all. I mean, obviously, I wasn't super motivated to watch this season in the first place. It's been out for a good while. Did it come out at the beginning of February? Finally got around to it just because I had nothing else going on. I felt like I hadn't posted a video in a while, so here we are. Let's just jump in with first things first, which is the animation of Disenchantment. It's really nothing new here compared to the other seasons of the show. It's not more exciting. It's not more visually audacious than previous seasons of the show. I was never a huge fan of the show's visuals. They're pleasant. Everything is executed in a fairly competent way, although for me, the visuals and specifically character animation tends to turn out just really stiff, and even in here there were a couple of moments where it was kind of strange the way they chose to animate different characters in sequence. So like, oh, we have 5 characters in a room. They're all gonna run out of the room. Instead of them all just starting to run at the same time, one character leaves, then another character leaves, and then 2 other characters leave together, and it just feels cheap to me. I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know if it's just a preference thing, but for me, it comes across really awkward. And when we just have these long dialogue sequences, and we have almost no sound design, there's almost no ambient sounds going on. They're probably there, but very, very quiet. I don't notice a lot of sound. We rarely get music unless it's some kind of big important scene or action scene or something like that. So you just have characters barely moving unless they're the one talking. And I know this is a thing on some primetime animated shows as well. I talked about it in Great North, and is that what that's called? Anyway, I'm not a big fan of it. Now that said, there is one little bit of extra spice in terms of the visuals for Part 4 of Disenchantment, and that is that we get some interesting settings. This ties in with some story stuff and just like environment stuff that I wanted to touch on as well, but generally, this season has a decent number of kind of cool, at times creepy environments that even borders on horror in a few moments. That was a nice change of pace, and I do at times feel like we're going on an adventure, even though for some reason a lot of these new and interesting environments happen to be in extremely close proximity to Dreamland and Dreamland Castle. In fact, some of these are like buried within Dreamland Castle, and it was a strange sense of like convenience, like, oh, we're not actually going anywhere. It might be an adventure, but we're not going on an adventure because there's no like distance traveled. There's this constant magnetic field bringing everything back around to Dreamland, and that's fine, but as I've talked about before in discussions about Disenchantment, is it Disenchantment or Disenchanted? I always mix this up. It's not a very memorable name to me. In this show, it's been a mix of short form, self-resolving episodes and big overarching story stuff, lore-heavy stuff, continuous storyline stuff. But the way that they distribute these different types of episodes is that for the first handful of episodes in any given season, and this has been true since I guess around season 2, the first handful of episodes contributes to the long arching stuff. It wraps up the cliffhanger from the end of the previous season, and then we don't really get back around to that main giant storyline that we're apparently supposed to care about until like the last episode or two of that season, and the cycle just repeats beats over and over. Like I was saying, some neat action, some neat environments. We kind of get different tones. Like I said, there's some horror stuff, there's genuine adventure-y stuff, there's kind of creepy or odd or dramatic positioning going on within the the political structure of Dreamland, even though I don't care about the political structure of Dreamland. So all of that stuff is decent, and even in terms of just comedy and the line-by-line writing, just dialogue and stuff, there are some funny little pieces. There were at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 different lines of dialogue from completely different characters that actually made me laugh in this season. Not super common for me, and Disenchantment. It's not Disenchanted. Why not Disenchanted? So I give credit. I give credit to the writers. I give credit to, artists doing backgrounds and stuff. The animation, no, it's television animation. It's nothing all that flashy at all. It's nothing all that fantastic to look at, but it is serviceable. But when we come around to some core elements of the show, particularly character development and character motivation, I don't know and I don't care. That sort of summarizes the situation here. There are many times where I just have no idea who I'm supposed to care about, what I'm supposed to care about. Even our main trio, Bean, Lucy, Elfo, they're supposed to be at the center of basically everything. Every once in a while we'll get an episode with a different character. I'll talk about Zog in just a second. But with them, I guess part of the point of Bean's character in particular from the very beginning has been that she just doesn't really know what she wants. She's kind of floating in the ether. She's at that age where she has to sort of pick a purpose and a life path, and she just isn't doing it. Every once in a while she thinks she has it figured out, and then it goes a different direction. Okay, that's a fine angle from a storytelling perspective. I have no issue with an aimless character. Some other people with more traditional views on storytelling might, but I really don't. It's okay if the story itself is them struggling with trying to find a motivation, trying to find a consistent source of inspiration, something to keep them moving along. But here, it's all 3 of them. I don't know. What are Elfo and Lucy even doing anymore? What do they care about? I guess Elfo's still attracted to Bean, even though that walked the line over into creepy territory a couple seasons ago, and it's not good. It's kind of uncomfortable sometimes. Lucy is there. When we spend so much time with these characters in particular, I don't know. I don't feel invested in their characters. I'm not alongside them on their mission because there is no mission most of the time. And the times where they do have a clear sort of surface level motivation, something that they need to get worked out, they do it and then it's over very, very quickly. And sorry, I keep leaning towards this final point, but first I do want to say another positive thing. I think Zog has been my favorite character this season by far. Last season, or for most of it, a big chunk of it, he was a non-character because he had some kind of mental breakdown and he made honking noises. It was just okay, just writing off that character for many episodes in a row, just has no agency. They bring him back around in this season, and Zog is a pretty, I don't know, not the most interesting character, but he definitely has some meat on him, no pun intended. He's fine. He's all right. He speaks strongly. He has strong feelings about things. He does generally want what's best for people, or at least for himself and for Bean. They've made him pretty sympathetic throughout the show. He's also deeply flawed. That's some decent character writing. And here we get a couple of, I'd say maybe 2 episodes that are almost exclusively focused on Zog, and they're pretty darn great. We knew what he wanted from the outset. He went to get what he wanted, and then he sort of kind of got it, and he was changed. There you go. That's a story. I enjoyed him a lot more than many of our other characters. So I do want to say that. And there are some other bright spots in terms of character moments, even small side characters that just come up in this season. But I'll finally roll around to my final major point here, and I think this is at the root of what has been a consistent sort of thorn in my enjoyment of Disenchantment, not Disenchanted. Nothing feels eventful. Nothing feels like it has a major impact, even when it clearly does. Even when the show comes out and tells me that something has had a major impact on our characters and their living situation, nothing really ever feels like it changes. And okay, I mean, it's a show. It's kind of a sitcom structure almost. Sort of. So from a certain angle, you could say, well, the status quo is very important. That's that basis that's the foundation, and then you build funny comedy situations on top of that, like many other shows, even like The Simpsons, Matt Groening's one good project. And here, there aren't even like special moments. Even when special moments are happening, they either feel rushed through, or I just don't feel anything at all while they're happening, but I know that I should be. At least for me, yeah, that's a narrative issue. That is an issue with how characters have been written, and it's also an issue of just execution of the production. Like, here's an example. This is kind of a spoiler, but there's a point in this season where Bean and King Zog are in control of Dreamland once again after a couple of different coup attempts, I suppose, and some big bad guys are getting in the way. They kick the bad guys out very quickly, and then they even just have a line that says something like, "Oh, everything's fine again." No, I think it's the Herald, right? He's running the news. He's yelling the news out to the town, and he said, "Dreamland, we have the leaders back, and everything's fine for once." And I was like, oh yeah, I guess that's true. I guess it's been like at least a couple seasons since we had Zog in control, and Bean comes up and becomes a leader. That's somewhat interesting. But I also didn't feel that, because even when the bad guy's in charge, nothing felt bad. Like, I never saw the effects of the bad thing happening. I never saw like Bean or the king feel really distraught about the whole situation. I didn't have a good sense of how long it had been since things were sort of at that normal state. And on top of that, there are different ways that you could communicate to the viewer that this is a big moment. You could have a scene where Bean is coronated officially, finally, without having to marry some other noble or whatever. She's now, just have a short scene, some big fanfare, some big loud music, a big event, maybe things go wrong, whatever, but at least we get this clear signal, oh, things are changing. Instead, we just get a scene of Bean and Zog in the throne room having a quick chat where the dialogue is so fast between them, despite how heavy the things that they're saying are, that it just feels like reading lines as opposed to a conversation. Or like, okay, if you don't want to have a big coronation scene to signal that things have changed in some way, that there's been some kind of victory or accomplishment for our characters, even if it's only a temporary one, you could change up the pacing a little bit. You could have things slow down. You could make it clear how bad things would have been, I guess, if the bad guys had stayed in charge. Like, nothing feels eventful. And this is something that I did talk about in my video on season 3. Character deaths mean nothing. They keep trying to treat character deaths like it's a big stakes deal. Oh boy, did they finally die for real? No, of course not. Of course not. Any of the lead characters, when it's teased that they die, and they often do this at the start of a season or at the end of a season, they just don't. Either they die and they come back very quickly, or it seems like they're dead, but they're not really dead, and everything's fine. Like, what's the point? Why bother? Why bother trying to establish stakes and big, giant series-long motivations when they're just not there? I never feel like the characters embody those motivations. I never feel like I, as a viewer, am as invested as I should be. I just don't feel it. It's the same thing. It's the same thing every time I go back to the show. I feel the same way about how it opens. I feel the same way about the characters. I feel the same way about the animation. I feel the same way about the stakes. I feel the same way about the settings. I really don't. I see the pattern so clearly in how they're structuring the show and telling specific stories that it's really not that interesting to me. If it had just one big thing going for it, if the characters were awesome, out of the park, well written, interesting, deep, okay, that's cool. If the environments were crazy cool and we get this incredible variety from each and every episode, okay, that would be one thing. If the animation was stunning and the character movement was just gorgeous and fluid, that would be another thing. But as it stands right now, I just don't, the pistons aren't firing. You know what I mean? I'm not getting enough out of it to really stay invested. And this was another one where when it ends on yet another cliffhanger, when it teases finally getting back to whatever the overarching plot is supposed to be with Bean's mom, which I don't actually care about, it just ends. It just ends, and I'm supposed to be on the edge of my seat. I'm supposed to be excited for the next one a year from now, I guess. I just feel like, oh yeah, you do this every single time, and then I see how things turn out on the other end when you resolve this cliffhanger, and it's really not that interesting. Maybe they're heading towards the home stretch here. Maybe they're finally just in the last season just gonna blow our doors off. It's gonna be wild, and we're just gonna, whoa, they resolved everything they needed to resolve, and they did it in a really really satisfying way. It was really exciting and well written. That could happen. It's clear that there are talented people working on the show. But as it stands right now, I just don't get much out of it. And that makes me kind of sad. And it also makes it difficult to talk about the show without devolving into some very consistent complaints, I'll say. But I think that's about it. I think we're good to go. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.